Hey guys, as always, I hope you are doing great. Today we'll talk about one of the most successful zombie survival video games and also one of my favorites, Dying Light. In this video, we'll analyze from a pathophysiological perspective the virus responsible for the events of the story, the Harran virus. We'll examine the physiological processes behind the different variants of infected as well as the anatomical changes they undergo. And of course, we'll see where this virus ranks on the danger scale we use in this channel. But first, as usual, let's get some context. The events of Dying Light take place in the city-state of Harran, an independent political entity whose exact location is never revealed in-game, although the novel tells us it is an enclave within the eastern portions of Turkey near Armenia and Georgia, possibly at the shores of the Black Sea. Because of this, Harran has a past marked by Ottoman rule, which is evident in the name of its inhabitants, the city's architecture, and even some of the weapons we can find. At the same time, there are also elements that point to the influence from the nearby Caucasus countries. Harran is therefore a place of contrast, a country divided between its ancient history and traditions, which are mostly present in the countryside, and the progress and globalization that we can also see in the city. It is a place with high levels of economic inequality between the different districts of a city that's undergoing rapid modernization. As part of these efforts, and with the goal of promoting this city as a tourist destination, Harran was chosen to host the 2014 Global Athletic Games, an event that would unfortunately end in a massacre. And here is where Harran Virus comes in. It is a pathogen of mysterious origins, though it is likely related to the attempts by Harran's Ministry of Defense to create a biological weapon derived from the rabies virus. This pathogen, much like rabies, is transmitted through bites and probably also through the exposure to infected bodily fluids via open wounds or even mucous membranes. It produces a rapidly progressing disease that manifests as fever, vomiting, and muscle pain, which after a variable period develop into temporary loss of consciousness, irritability, hallucinations, and seizures. Eventually, the infected enter a state of extreme aggression directed almost exclusively at those who have not yet been infected. Now, from a pathophysiological standpoint, and as indicated in the novels, Harran virus stands out from others due to its ability to induce a significant increase in adrenaline levels in the bloodstream. Adrenaline, also known as epinephrine, is a neuroendocrine substance, meaning it functions both as a hormone and a neurotransmitter, and among other things, it activates the fight-or-flight response in our body. Adrenaline is thus one of the substances responsible for our body's response to acute stress. Generally speaking, it enhances not only our ability to fight or flee, but also our tolerance to injuries and dangerous wounds. It is an emergency switch that increases our body's capabilities at a high cost, but allowing us to defend ourselves or at least escape in the face of imminent danger. Adrenaline not only increases blood flow to the muscles, but also makes them more sensitive to the nerve signals that trigger contractions, enhancing strength and physical performance, though this can also lead to tremors, thus the expression to shake in fear. Additionally, adrenaline reduces blood flow to non-essential tissues for fighting or fleeing, such as the skin or the digestive system. This is the reason why we turn pale when we are nervous or scared. And similarly, the nausea or the butterflies in the stomach sensation that appears under stressful situations could also be explained through similar mechanisms. This redirection of blood from non-vital organs to circulation also serves, to some extent, as a defense against blood loss. In addition to this, adrenaline also has pronounced effects on the heart. First of all, adrenaline is a positive inotropic, meaning that it increases the strength of our heartbeats. Beyond this, it is also a positive chronotropic, meaning that it increases our heart rate or heart rhythm. But not only this, it is also a positive dromotropic substance, meaning that it increases the conduction speed of our heart muscle, and this means that the electrical signals responsible for triggering our heartbeats can also travel and propagate faster through this organ. The sum of all of this is a sharp increase in cardiac output. This not only supplies our muscles with blood for us to fight or flee, but it is also a very important compensation mechanism against blood loss. If the amount of blood left in your body is a bit low, the best thing you can do is make it circulate faster. But beyond this, adrenaline also increases circulating glucose levels and induces the liberation of fatty acids from fat tissue, which of course serves to supply our muscles and our heart with nutrients to sustain their increased level of activity. This is also the reason why adrenaline analogs are used to cut fat in some questionable bodybuilding practices. And to top it all off, adrenaline is also a bronchodilator. It opens the airways, facilitating airflow to the lungs to ensure that enough oxygen is delivered to the muscles, although this can also save people's lives in the context of severe allergic reactions and asthma. But when it comes to the Harran virus infection, all of this translates to newly transformed individuals becoming almost literally killing machines, enhanced by a hormone whose specific purpose is to prepare the human body for combat. Beyond that, adrenaline also has a certain emotional effect that can trigger feelings of distress or even terror, which could partly explain the behavior of newly transformed individuals, a variant of infected known as virus. These creatures are extremely aggressive, fast, and they don't even try to bite their victims, they simply beat them to death. Also, virals have the incredible ability to be extremely inopportune and untimely. With that said, this state of hyperactivity and exotic aggression is transitory, which makes a lot of sense from a physiological point of view, because the thing is, the human heart cannot sustain the effects of high levels of adrenaline indefinitely. At some point, it simply gives out, becomes exhausted, or even deceased. In fact, there is a heart condition caused by persistently elevated adrenaline levels called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, better known as broken heart syndrome. Now, you might be wondering, why does it even matter if the infected suffer from a heart condition? After all, they are undead, right? Now, that doesn't seem to be the case for those affected by this virus. These are living people who might ignore pain and even undergo some anatomical transformations, as we'll see later, but they are, without a doubt, still living beings who can drown, bleed out, or be poisoned. So it stands to reason that they can also suffer from heart failure. That said, most virals eventually progress to the state of biters, degraded, slow, clumsy, and lethargic infected that pose a threat primarily due to their sheer numbers. They are not strong, well maybe they are strong, but they are also many. This sluggishness, clumsiness, and lethargy could very well be an adaptation mechanism in response to a state of constant movement and wakefulness, a way to conserve energy in order to remain active without sleep or sustenance as long as possible. Although it is also true that a decreased level of consciousness is a common sign of central nervous system infections. Sporadically, biters can revert back to virals, maybe signaling a peak in adrenaline secretion, and beyond this, biters also become much more active in the absence of ultraviolet light, that is, mainly at night when the infected become far more dangerous. This might be, at least in part, because Harran virus, much like the rabies virus from which it likely originates, is destroyed by this type of light. Here we can draw an interesting analogy between these two viruses. Rabies is an almost invariably lethal viral disease that affects the central nervous system and that causes a highly characteristic sign, hydrophobia, an intense fear or aversion to water. Similarly, photophobia, an aversion to light, is the hallmark sign of Harran virus infection. Though, to be fair, photophobia is also a symptom of cerebral or meningeal inflammation, which can occur in many different diseases. But in the case of this virus, this sign goes much further. Individuals infected with Harran virus, especially those in advanced stages of the disease, exhibit a violent skin reaction when directly exposed to ultraviolet light. And the best example of this are volatiles, a type of infected that is extremely fast, strong, and aggressive, whose anatomy has been drastically altered by the effects of the virus, to the point that they no longer even resemble human beings. Volatiles possess a modified bone structure, with one of the most striking changes being that their last three pair of ribs are floating ribs, meaning that they are not connected to the sternum. This is an additional pair when compared to normal humans, and this is added to the fact that they are evidently exposed. Now, it would be hard to exactly pinpoint the reason behind these changes, but possibly it is due to alterations in the size or organization of the thoracic and abdominal organs, or maybe alternatively due to changes in the muscle composition of the abdominal wall. It could also possibly be both things at the same time. In addition to this, the mandible, the lower jaw, has split into two sections along the midline, likely to allow for a wider, although maybe weaker bite. These skeletal modifications mutations are accompanied by an increased muscle mass and the development of claws, along with the ability to spit corrosive gastric secretion at their prey when they cannot reach them. Some volatiles even develop a form of body armor probably based on bone plates that significantly increase the threat this class of infected represents. As we mentioned before, volatiles not only exhibit photophobia but also a violent skin reaction when exposed to ultraviolet light. This cannot be explained solely by the virus being destroyed under UV radiation, simply because most of it wouldn't be directly exposed as it resides even in cells in deep tissues. However, in human pathophysiology there exists a group of diseases characterized by the appearance of lesions and pain when the affected individual is exposed to light, something remarkably similar to what happens with volatiles. These diseases are known as cutaneous porphyrias. The pathophysiology of these conditions is far beyond the scope of this video, but to summarize, the body accumulates certain molecules called porphyrins which can capture photons from light and in the process trigger chemical reactions that cause damage. We briefly touched on this in the previous video. Porphyrins form the basis of chlorophyll in plants, a molecule that specifically uses this ability to react with light to produce energy. However, this same type of molecules also serve as the foundation of human hemoglobin, the protein responsible for transporting oxygen in our blood. This is in part the reason why hemoglobin and chlorophyll resemble each other, at least to an extent. In the case of volatiles, it is likely that Harran virus infection has induced the abnormal production of modified and extremely reactive porphyrins, perhaps in an attempt to modify human hemoglobin or as a byproduct or precursor of another molecule. The mutagenic capabilities of Harran virus also led to the formation of severely deformed infected variants with radically different capabilities. The first among these are the bombers, a type of infected that accumulates not only gases, also pressurized corrosive intestinal secretions within its digestive system. This accumulation distends their gastrointestinal tract far beyond what their abdominal walls and diaphragm can withstand, ultimately leading to the literal evisceration of these creatures and the herniation of their abdominal organs into the thoracic cavity. These alterations are most likely caused by the hypertrophy and blockage of one of the many sphincters present throughout the human digestive system. Sphincters are muscular structures that contract or relax in order to regulate the passage of food throughout the different portions of our gastrointestinal tract. The failure of one of these sphincters can lead to intestinal obstruction and consequently to the buildup of gases and fluids. In my opinion, the most probable site of this obstruction in the case of bombers would be the ileocecal valve, a sphincter that separates the small intestine from the large intestine, or to be precise, the ileum from the cecum. Bombers, most probably through the intense contraction of their own intestinal walls, can literally explode, releasing all the pressure and secretions they have accumulated. Physiologically, this infected variant would be very similar to the boomers we see in Left 4 Dead. The next among the special infected is the toad, which similarly uses its gastrointestinal secretions as a weapon, except that this time it is at a distance. They're capable of vomiting massive amounts of corrosive secretions in rapid succession. For this reason, it is likely that they have an enlarged or even branched stomach to increase the secreting surface of this organ, which can occasionally evert and protrude through their own mouth. To multiply secretion production and their attack capabilities, it is also probable that pancreatic and biliary secretion are present in their attacks. Now, moving on to less visceral enemies, if we can put it that way, we have Demolishers. This class of infected is characterized by massive hypertrophy of their muscles and skeleton, which grants them, on the one hand, impressive strength, while on the other hand, this allows them to withstand damage quite well. At first glance, they are quite similar to goons, except that the latter possess a much more preserved anatomy and retain enough intelligence to wield weapons. It is possible that goons undergo virus-induced mutations that eventually lead them to become demolishers. A much rarer class of infected are screamers, infected children who adopt a frightened or terrified demeanor when they detect a threat, screaming and crying at a volume high enough to stun a person while simultaneously attracting other types of infected. Screamers are quite rare, and this suggests that Harran virus directly eliminates targets those with weaker immune systems, such as children or the elderly, whom we also encounter quite rarely. One additional detail that stands out in the physiology, or rather the anatomy of the infected, is the absence of hair in almost all variants. Only virals, those who have only recently been turned, retain it. However, this could also be quite consistent with the previously explained pathophysiology, as this can actually be connected to adrenaline. You see, in the human body, adrenaline is mostly produced by a pair of glands located above the kidneys, hence the name adrenaline. Ad renis, renis being kidney in Latin. The other common term for this hormone, epinephrine, follows the same logic. Epi, that means above, and nephros, that means kidney, but this time it is in Greek. These glands are consequently called adrenal or suprarenal glands, and they produce a wide variety of hormones beyond just adrenaline. Among these hormones, the ones that interest us the most in this case are androgens. Androgens are masculinizing steroid hormones, with testosterone being the primary representative of this group, and although they are usually regarded as a kind of hormone exclusive to the testes in men, the truth is adrenal glands also produce these kind of hormones, but in far smaller quantities. Now, abnormally enlarged adrenal glands as a consequence of Harran virus infection would explain not only the high levels of adrenaline described in the novels, but also a couple more things. Androgens are well known for their ability to induce muscle hypertrophy, and thus they are also usually called anabolic steroids. An increase in the production of these hormones would explain not only the strength and muscularity of certain special infected and volatiles, but even that of some of the common infected that also seem to be quite buff, to be honest. On the other hand, this would also explain hair loss. Certain androgens such as dihydrotestosterone, the famous DHT, are also known for causing alopecia. Now, although adrenal gland hypertrophy might explain a good portion of the modifications we see among the infected, it is an insufficient explanation because, as we mentioned before, the differences that exist between the various types of infected are quite radical. But if you saw our previous video, you will remember that we discussed how viruses can induce mutations in humans. Well, in real life, this most likely results in the development of different types of cancer, and the viruses responsible for this type of mutations are usually called oncogenic viruses. Oncogenic meaning cancer or tumor generator. In the case of Harran virus infection, this could explain the tumoral growth we can actually see in different types of infected. But beyond all of this, there is also the concept of epigenetics. Epigenetics refers to the changes in the expression of our genome without any alteration to the genetic information itself. This means that our body can activate or deactivate different parts of our DNA depending on circumstances. If you think about it, it makes sense. Our body will not express exactly the same genes during a period of extreme famine as it would in times of food abundance. This is one of the many mechanisms we have to adapt to our environment, and there is no reason to believe that Harran virus couldn't take advantage of these mechanisms as well, especially given that this is a design virus. It did not evolve, it was created. So the best assumption I can make is that Harran virus determines what type of infected a person becomes through epigenetic mechanisms. It is the same virus that infects everyone, but it expresses different genes and triggers different transformations depending on the affected individual. Perhaps it relies on hormonal cues. Steroid hormones, for example, act directly at the level of the DNA in our cells and could also interact with the virus genetic material. Thus, infected children that survive the infection always become screamers due to the low levels of sex hormones circulating in their bodies, while some adult men with higher amounts of circulating testosterone turn into demolishers or goons. The bombers may originate from individuals with high levels of gastrointestinal hormones, such as gastrin, for example, which induces gastric acid secretion in normal humans. Another proof of this epigenetic mechanism is the serum of substance we can see in the following that's capable of transforming infected people into sentient volatiles that even possess telepathic capabilities. In my opinion, this serum is not another strain or variant of the Harran virus, but rather a chemical substance that interacts with the viral genetic material in an epigenetic way to express the genes necessary for the development of sentient volatiles. Some proof of this is the fact that in its gaseous state, the effects of the serum are limited and temporary. It evaporates easily, it modifies the behavior of the infected and the senses of humans as if it was a drug, and also it doesn't seem to be contagious, which would be the case if this was another strain of a virus. Because all of this, I think this serum is actually a substance that interacts with the normal Harran virus, something that fits quite well with the epigenetics hypothesis. And the creation of normal volatiles could also be explained through similar mechanisms, and this brings us to what in my opinion makes Harran virus one of the most dangerous zombie pathogens of all. But before proceeding to the next section, if you're enjoying this video, I would ask you to please subscribe and leave a comment so you can help me grow this channel. Now back to the issue. The thing with Harran virus is that infected individuals undoubtedly retain a certain degree of intelligence. As described in the novels, volatiles are the result of submerging infected individuals who have not yet been transformed into the leachate produced by infected corpses. This is also something we see in one of the side missions in the following DLC. This has two major implications. First, the infected actively collect corpses and accumulate them in specific locations in a coordinated manner, places we know as nests. Secondly, they possess the level of organization necessary to avoid indiscriminately eating everyone they come across. Instead, they transport certain victims and keep them alive for transformation. This suggests that infected can actually communicate with one another or even have some form of collective intelligence. And this last part might seem like taking it too far, but we do in fact have telepathic volatiles. At the same time, this coordinated body collecting behavior would give us a quite good explanation as to why the streets of Harran are not filled to the brim with corpses. This certain level of intelligence is also reflected in how the Harran epidemic began. It started somewhat discreetly, with isolated cases of indiscriminate violence initially attributed to substance abuse or mental illness, where an infected individual would bite and attack others, only to then escape as fast as possible, almost as if they knew that at the moment they wouldn't be able to stand their ground against security forces. This pattern persisted. People were attacked and then they either fled or simply disappeared until the infected finally launched a massive, almost coordinated assault on the stadium where the Global Athletic Games were taking place. It was as if they were waiting to gather enough strength to strike, and when we think about it, they did so in a very strategic location. Now add to this the fact that volatiles are a sustainable form of infected. They hunt, they rest, and they are definitely not going to rot away or degrade over time. They are far beyond simply being diseased individuals like the rest of the variants of infected, and they can also increase their population, even though this implies the parasitation of human population. For this reason, I believe Harran virus is far more dangerous than other similar science fiction pathogens. But before giving it a final score on the danger scale, we must also consider the existence of anticin. It is possible that anticin works similarly to reverse transcriptase inhibitors, the medication used to treat HIV infections. It prevents the virus from replicating, allowing the immune system to keep it at bay, though not to eliminate it, making it a medication that must be taken continuously. Even so, I doubt anticin could be a scalable solution. In a scenario where Harran virus spreads worldwide, production would almost certainly be insufficient and impossible to deliver to everyone who needs it. It is even quite probable that many people would flatly refuse to use it, and as civilization collapsed, the production of this medicine would decline as well. Given the characteristics of this virus, in my opinion, the most likely outcome is that humanity would be reduced to just a few enclaves, perhaps around the last remaining anticin factories or in locations with long periods of continuous sunlight, such as the poles, where the extreme cold could also help keep the infected at bay during the long winter nights. Meanwhile, the infected would take control of the rest of the planet, possibly developing even more adaptations, mutations, and intelligence, something that is suggested in the outcome of the following DLC. ultimately leading to the destruction of human civilization. For all these reasons, Harran Virus earns the highest score for a global-scale threat, an 8 out of 10. And keep in mind that zombie pathogens usually tend to classify as a 7 or lower. Before you go, I haven't forgotten about bolters. They are just hard to catch and I don't find them particularly interesting. Besides, this video is getting too long and my editor, meaning my girlfriend, will without a doubt complain. But to say something, I think that in the case of bolters, the fight or flight response induced by adrenaline clearly favors the flight part. Solid theories aside, I have to say that I haven't played Dying Light 2, so maybe I'm missing something here. I know the virus in the second entry of this franchise is not exactly the same, but maybe I'm missing something. Please don't forget to feed the almighty algorithm with a comment. I'll sign off and I'll see you all in the next video.